I spent a week on Wayland on Linux Mint, and I can tell you honestly, it was a disaster. The screen went black dozens of times, nothing worked properly, and I force shut down the computer using the power button more times than I'd care to admit. Let's take a look at exactly what happened. I tested Wayland on Linux Mint Cinnamon 22.3, which is currently in experimental stage, and I want to give you an honest and detailed account of everything I experienced during this journey. Before we begin, a small technical note about my setup. I have an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1660 Super Graphics card, an AMD Ryzen 5 3600X processor, and 16 gigabytes of RAM. It's not a top-of-the-line configuration for 2026, but it's a solid one that runs flawlessly on X11. Knowing that NVIDIA and Wayland have always had a complicated relationship, I was curious to see how far compatibility had come by 2026. One important thing to mention right from the start, this entire video is made from screenshots, not regular screen recordings. And I didn't choose this approach out of convenience. It's simply because I couldn't manage to record the screen with any screen recording application on Wayland. But I'll talk about that in more detail a little later. When I first booted into the Wayland session, the first thing I noticed was that the system had reset my graphics card driver to the open source Nouveau driver. On X11, I had the proprietary NVIDIA driver installed, but Wayland didn't recognize it automatically and fell back to the open source alternative. I had to go in manually and install the latest recommended driver from NVIDIA, which at the time of testing was version 590. This is also the officially recommended version for this generation of graphics cards. The installation itself wasn't complicated, but it's an extra step beyond what you'd expect from a system that claims to be tested for everyday users. Let's start with the good news, because there are things that work well, and we need to be fair. If you use your computer for simple, everyday tasks, Wayland performs surprisingly decently. I listened to music without any issues, whether it was local files or streaming. I watched videos, both on YouTube and local files, and everything ran smoothly, without stuttering and without any visible problems. Browser navigation was just as pleasant as on X11. So if you're the type of user who uses their computer for content consumption, communication, and browsing, Wayland on Linux Mint can seem functional. But if you're a more advanced user who edits video, records the screen, plays games, or works with more complex applications, things get complicated quickly. One of the things that constantly annoyed me throughout the week was the keyboard behavior. On Wayland, the keyboard only works partially. Regular letter and number keys work normally, but the modifier keys, Shift, Control, and Alt, are non-functional. This means you can't use basic keyboard shortcuts. These shortcuts are part of every computer user's workflow, regardless of what they're doing. The fact that they don't work turns any simple task into an exercise in frustration. I discovered this fairly quickly when I tried to do ordinary things. I also couldn't drag and drop files. I wanted to move files from one folder to another using the classic method, hold the file with the mouse and drag it, and it simply didn't work. These two limitations together, the partially functional keyboard and the lack of drag and drop, make everyday work on Wayland extremely tedious. Now we get to the reason why this entire video is made from screenshots. I wanted to record the screen with OBS Studio, the standard application for streaming and screen recording on Linux. The experience was a complete disaster. Every time I tried to start a recording with OBS, the application crashed. But it wasn't just OBS that stopped. After each crash, the desktop screen would go completely black. The wallpaper disappeared. The desktop icons disappeared. I could no longer right-click to access the context menu. The update icon in the taskbar in the right side area disappeared as well. Essentially, the entire desktop would visually disintegrate, even though the system was still running. The only solution was to restart the computer. There is no elegant way to recover the desktop after these crashes. I also went into OBS settings to try to fix the problem. I went to Output, then Recording, and opened the video encoder list. What I found there surprised me. No encoder was selected. Even more surprisingly, NVIDIA NVENC, the hardware encoder of my graphics card, was not in the list. Wayland simply didn't recognize my graphics card as an encoding option. I only had 3 options available: AOM, AV1, SVT, AV1, and X264. All 3 are software encoders, not hardware, which means they put all the work on the processor. I tried all 3 options one by one. None of them worked. OBS crashed regardless of which encoder I chose. After the failure with OBS, I decided to try a simpler alternative. I installed Kazam, a screen recording application that is lighter and less demanding than OBS. The result? Equally disappointing. Kazam would start, appear to be recording, but when I opened the resulting video file, the screen was completely black. The only visible image was the mouse cursor. Kazam was recording the cursor, but not the screen content. This is a fundamental problem with Wayland. The protocol has a different architecture compared to X11 when it comes to accessing screen content. Screen recording applications need to be explicitly compatible with Wayland and use specific protocols such as Pipewire and XDG Desktop Portal to capture the screen. Most applications are still not fully adapted. I also wanted to test gaming, knowing this is a sensitive area for Wayland with NVIDIA. The first surprise came right at Steam's launch. The first time I opened Steam, the application crashed and closed instantly. I relaunched Steam several times, and sometimes it would start, sometimes it wouldn't. But even when Steam did start, games wouldn't run. Whether it was native Linux games or games running through Proton, the result was the same. Steam would crash and close. During the Steam tests, multiple times the screen went completely black and the system stopped responding to any input. The mouse stopped working, the keyboard stopped working. The only option was to press the physical power button on the computer to force it off. This is not an acceptable experience for any user. I still wanted to see whether games in general don't work, or just those on Steam. I installed SuperTux from the Software Manager, a native Linux game available directly in the distribution's repository. After several crashes, and after discovering that the Alt key doesn't work in the game and I had to remap it to the Z key, the game worked. SuperTux ran well, smoothly, without any graphical issues. So simple. Native Linux games can work on Wayland, but the Steam experience is currently completely non-functional. As a YouTube content creator, one of my main questions was, can I edit video on Wayland? The short answer is no, and I'm going to explain in detail why. I opened Kdenlive, the video editor I normally use for all the videos on my channel. The first major problem I encountered was that drag and drop doesn't work at all. Normally, the workflow in any video editor consists of dragging video clips onto the timeline, adding audio files, and applying effects and transitions by dragging them from panels. On Wayland, none of this works. You can't drag a video clip onto the timeline, you can't add a music track, you can't apply a visual effect. Essentially, Kdenlive opens, looks fine, but you can't do anything useful with it. I then moved on to Audacity for audio editing, hoping that things might be better with a simpler application. Unfortunately, the experience was even worse than with Kdenlive. Audacity crashed frequently and closed without any warning, losing everything I had worked on up to that point. When I managed to keep it open long enough, I discovered that I couldn't add effects to audio tracks. The effects panel was there, the effects were listed, but I couldn't apply them to any track. The basic functionalities that make Audacity a useful tool simply didn't respond. For someone who produces video content regularly, these limitations are decisive. You can't edit video, you can't edit audio, you can't record your screen. Wayland, in its current state on Linux Mint, is incompatible with a content creator's workflow. I also used VirtualBox during the tests, since I sometimes need virtual machines for various projects. The experience with VirtualBox on Wayland can be described in a single word: unpredictable. Sometimes VirtualBox would start without any issues, the virtual machine would load, and I could enter the virtualized operating system as usual. Other times, following the exact same steps, VirtualBox would throw errors and refuse to start the virtual machine. There was no apparent logic to its behavior. The same settings, the same virtual machine files, completely different results from one session to the next. You never know whether today's session will be one where VirtualBox works or one where you'll waste time dealing with errors and restarts. For users who depend on virtualization in their daily work, this instability is unacceptable. When will Wayland be stable on Linux Mint? This is the question many people are asking. Linux Mint version 23, which should appear this summer, will not bring a stable Wayland. It will remain in experimental or preview stage. My personal estimate is that Wayland will be truly stable and recommended for general use on Linux Mint only with version 24, which could appear around 2028. That's a long time horizon, but the current reality of the ecosystem justifies this caution. Until then, X11 remains the right choice for anyone who wants stability and compatibility. Wayland is the future on Linux, but that future hasn't fully arrived yet, at least not on Linux Mint with NVIDIA hardware. After a week of testing, my conclusion is clear. Wayland on Linux Mint Cinnamon 22.3 is an experimental stage and behaves exactly as such. It is not recommended for daily use, especially if you have an NVIDIA graphics card and use your computer for more than just browsing and media consumption. The limitations are significant and affect users across various categories. Content creators can't record their screen or edit. Gamers can't play games through Steam. And everyday users are frustrated by the partially functional keyboard and lack of drag and drop. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content about Linux Mint. Write in the comments if you've also tested Wayland and what your experience was. See you in the next video.